Let's talk about Standard 6, Substandard C, explaining the major reasons for the War of 1812 and the war's significance on the development of a national identity as two different things. Before we do that, though, before we get to that, I want to just point out that the White House was burned down after the Battle of Bladensburg in August of 1814 during the War of 1812. The White House was burned down. Dolly Madison, James Madison's First Lady, President Madison's wife, saved this painting of George Washington and several other items while it was burning down. And the Star Spangled Banner was written by F. Scott Key here as he saw Fort McHenry being bombarded and taken over by the British. And the Star Spangled Banner today is our national anthem. So back to 6C, we need to look at the causes of the War of 1812 first. And our themes: War of 1812 is conflict. The Treaty of Ghent that ends the war is a compromise, so conflict and compromise. Blockade or interruption of American trade was one of the biggest major reasons. Economic conflict. Impressment was another major reason. International relations and conflict. Refusal of the British to leave the forts in the Ohio River Valley or Northwest Territory, and then the inciting of Native Americans or arming them on the borders of the United States, on the west and in the south, are going to be some of the biggest reasons why the War of 1812 started. So first thing we'll do is look at the major reasons of the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 is the second conflict between the United States of America, now as states as an independent nation, a war against Great Britain. So many people see this as the second war for independence. I teach my students in class, and you guys ought to look at this and consider it. Some people don't like it, some do. The causes of the listening and to the instruction, but coming back and reviewing and saying that the four eyes, I use this graphic organizer, the four eyes causes the War of 1812 will help you remember. This little device might help you remember if you can remember the different words. Interruption is the first word, and we're talking about a blockade here of the Atlantic Ocean. The British blockaded the Atlantic Ocean to keep American ships from taking goods to France that might be used against Great Britain. France was doing a blockade too, but Great Britain here is very active in this with impressment. We're going to look at in just a few minutes. But interruption of trade or a blockade, and then impressment of soldiers we're going to talk about. United States citizens on commercial vessels were forced into the British naval service. And then inciting means to stir up, to start Native Americans by giving them weapons on the border to get them to fight against Americans or steal their property or cause havoc. And then insistence on the British to stand in the forts in the Ohio River Valley. They didn't want to leave because of the lucrative fur trade. So the four eyes is a good way to remember this. So let's go over these individually. I'm going to do them out of order. So the insistence on remaining in the Northwest Territory. The British refused to leave the area even after, even up till the War of 1812. Even under the Articles of Confederation, when the Northwest Territory was set up and this land ordinance surveyed the land and they were planning on moving out there and settle this, the British were still out there around the Great Lakes in the Northwest Territory, north of the Ohio River, out here in this area here. And here are some British forts here, and there's going to be some battles there during the War of 1812, but a lot of on the American side, there was a lot of Americans upset because the British were still out in the American side trading with Native Americans, and some had set up forts out in here, and they refused to leave. This was a big issue with Americans. One of the major reasons why we had the War of 1812, because Americans over on the East Coast wanted to open this up for American settlement, and they wanted the British gone and out of there. Manifest Destiny was a part of this movement to get out here and settle this area, and an expansionist idea or sentiment by the colonists are going to bring about in Congress this group called themselves the War Hawks, and the War Hawks are going to push for this War of 1812 to happen, because a lot of these guys that are War Hawks are land speculators that want to get out there and get that land and sell it and make a profit off of it. Their ideas manifested in the declaration of war And the reason why they wanted the War of 1812 was to get those new lands out there in the Northwest Territory. Alright, the British in Ohio River Valley, the Jay Treaty of 1794, they were still out there. And this first mentioned in this treaty, they agreed to leave. They still did not leave, even up to 1812 when the war started, still did not leave. And the reason why is because of that fur trade with Native Americans. So, while they were out there, a lot of the Americans felt like the British were inciting Native Americans to attack American property and citizens. Out here, they felt that the British were out here telling Native Americans in the area to cross over into American territory and attack there, and to attack out here on the frontier. So a lot of Americans were upset about, this inciting of Native Americans, the Second Eye, arming them with weapons to cause problems on the frontier borders and the border up in the northwest area here. And one person that causes a lot of trouble in this area is going to be Tecumseh. And Tecumseh is going to be a Native American that was actually encouraged and supplied with weapons by the British. We know that, looking back in history now, that he was encouraged by the British, and they suspected it as much, the Americans did. So that's another reason why they really did not like the British being in the area, and why they wanted them gone. And then Tecumseh's War in 1811, the Battle of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, that will become our president. He won't be in there very long, but the Battle of Tippecanoe and the ending of Tecumseh's reign up in this area was is a part of this idea that Native Americans like Tecumseh were being, incited to fight against Americans, and the British were giving them arms, muskets, powder, ball to cause trouble. In the southern theater of the War of 1812 down in the Gulf of Mexico, the Battle of New Orleans is going to be the last battle here where Andrew Jackson wins in the Battle of New Orleans here. And on his way down from Tennessee, he's going to stop in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend here and defeat some Native Americans. And in 1814, he's going to make them sign a treaty called the Treaty of Fort Jackson. And August 9th, 1814, this land here in red is going to be ceded by the Creek Indian Nation to the United States. And if you look down here, this is where Bainbridge, Georgia is, Decatur County. It's a little part of the local history at the time. Very important rivers were the Apalachicola River coming up, and the Flint River going out this way, and the Chattahoochee River going up this way, and then over here, and around Mobile, and then New Orleans here in the Gulf here. During the War of 1812, some action happened down here, but a lot of action happened also in local history after the War of 1812. It was here that Andrew Jackson built Fort Scott at the confluence of the Flint and Chattahoochee River. Fort Scott is in Decatur County, was built where Decatur County is today. After the War of 1812, around 1817 he built it. 1819, from 1814 to 1819, he had the first Seminole War, and they were trying to get Native Americans out of this area after the War of 1812, so that American citizens could settle this area. And a lot of them started flowing into Decatur County, where it is today down here, where this Treaty of Fort Jackson opened up this territory. Eventually, around 1818. Down around St. Mark's area in Pensacola down in here, Andrew Jackson's going to find two British citizens. One was named Alexander Arbuthnot, and the other one was named Robert Ambrister. And he suspected them and believed them of giving weapons and gunpowder and muskets and cannons even to the Native Americans on the border here, that would go up and take slaves too and run them back across the border from Georgia area up here. And so he hung one and shot the other. I can't remember which one he hanged and which one he shot, but those two guys he killed. And it almost caused an international problem, because this land was owned by the Spanish. Florida was, east and west Florida was owned by the Spanish. And he caught them down in this area and killed them. And they were British. And a lot of people said, see there, they were supplying the Native Americans on the border and causing a lot of trouble still, even after the War of 1812. And then, Fort Scott was right here at the confluence of these rivers, and if we let's see, yeah, he was here in the confluence here that Fort Scott was built, and it was abandoned later, and then on up the Flint River there, another fort was built called Fort Recovery, because the soldiers that were Fort Scott developed malaria or yellow fever because of the mosquito bites there. And the Fort Recovery area is around where around the recovery area down below Faceville, the recovery community down Highway 97, around Jack Wingett's Lodge down there. Okay. And it was the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819 to settle this issue that happened with Jackson down here in our area here, that the Adams-Onis Treaty, that the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States, so we get Florida. That was another land acquisition, another territory that we get and add to the United States. So now Florida is part of the United States. Some more local history is that in the Northern Theater up here, 2 individuals became heroes there, and even after the war over on the African coast fighting the Barbary pirates were 2 Commodores. One was named Commodore William Bainbridge, pictured here, and the other one was Commodore Stephen Decatur, pictured here. Our city, Bainbridge, was named after Commodore William Bainbridge, and our county, Decatur County, is named after Commodore Stephen Decatur. On to the next is interruption of trade. In the Atlantic, the British interrupted trade because they set up this blockade here. There was an incident near right here near Virginia, I think it was the Leopard, where a British ship blew up an American commercial vessel with smuggled goods right here close to the United States. So there was a blockade here by the British even before the War of 1812 started, and Americans didn't like that because that caused a decrease in trade and hurt their economy. And here's a little analyzing document we can analyze. The War of 1812, here we see that there was a dip downward because of the blockade, because of the interruption of trade by the British. By 1814 had reached an all-time low because of that blockade. Then after that it shoots up after the war. So Great Britain blockaded our ships from going across the Atlantic Ocean. This disrupting of trade is blockade or interruption of trade. It's going to anger Americans and want them to call for war. Impressment was another one of the eyes. American citizens that were on commercial fishing vessels or any trade vessels going to Europe, if the British caught them running past the blockade or going to an area, they were supposed to go to British ports first, be analyzed whatever was there, and make sure none of it was war materials. And some of them didn't. And so the British, when they caught up with them to punish them, they forced them into naval service with the British Navy. And this is going to anger Americans a lot here, this impressment. So the British would capture American commercial ships that did not report to the British port, and they were forced against their will and conscripted or drafted into the British Navy. And here's a picture here where a few American sailors are going to be drafted over here, conscripted, and put on this British ship over here and made to wash the decks and all kind of other tasks and chores. And here's a little cartoon showing some American citizens coming off commercial vessels forced into the British Navy. So this impressment was another major reason for the War of 1812. And what you could do if you want to, make some concept graphic organizers like this. The War of 1812, what's the major reasons? British refused to leave the Ohio River Valley. They interrupted trade or put up a blockade in the Atlantic Ocean, hurt our economy. The policy of impressment, where they stole our citizens, made them serve as British Navy seamen. And then the Warhawks group, politicians that wanted that westward expansion, manifestation over to the Northwest Territory. They even wanted Canada. They want to take British Canada away from them. And they wanted Florida too. Eventually we're going to get Florida. But anyway, British incited Native Americans on the border, giving them weapons to fight against Americans, caused problems. So these are 5 big reasons here that you can, in your notes, you can be active and kind of draw something out like this to help you remember. It's a visual. You know, and one of my kids used this one. I really don't like this one too much, but one of my kids showed me this one. Blockade of North America. It spells out British, not ignoring furs. Native American supplied weapons. Impressment, forcing American citizens in the Navy. Forts in the Ohio River Valley. British wouldn't leave. You know, whatever works for you. You know, you can use art or whatever you want to make you a poster like this. Try to remember any type of visual you can to help you remember the major causes. So the ending of the war come with the Treaty of Ghent, and it's going to end the War of 1812. This treaty, the H is silent, Ghent, and after the Treaty of Ghent is signed officially and the war ends officially, it's when one of the major battles happens, the Battle of New Orleans. And this Battle of New Orleans is going to make Andrew Jackson a hero, and eventually he's going to become president because of his exploits in the South area in the Seminole Wars and in the War of 1812. And this war is fought after the War of 1812 had been ended with the Treaty of Ghent, and he becomes a hero with the defeat of the British in New Orleans. And here's a picture of General Jackson defeating the British. Now notice in our standards we need to know more than just the major reasons. We need to know the significance on the development of a national identity. You know, what about the national identity? How did the War of 1812, how did it create this development of national pride or national patriotism? And that's exactly what it did. Our national identity, meaning that we're Americans, right? So there were tensions between the British and Americans already, even after the Revolutionary War, before the War of 1812 happened. But when Andrew Jackson and his crew beat the British at the Battle of New Orleans again, it's almost like a second victory already. It's almost like the sequel to the Battle of Yorktown, you know, when they captured General Cornwallis, but in this sense capture someone else. But the idea is there, boost the morale of Americans, you know, that we feel this national pride because we Americans whip these British again. They're the most powerful nation in the world, and we whip them again. So all across the United States, citizens are very proud. They consider themselves Americans. They're proud to be an American. It's nationalism or national sense of identity or patriotism. It becomes very strong throughout the United States. So the impact of the War of 1812 is definitely national pride and patriotism. You need to know that. That's in the standards specifically stated. We survived the Second War for Independence, what some people call the War of 1812, against the greatest power on earth. New heroes, Andrew Jackson, new symbols, you know, and we showed that the U.S. was here to stay, that this wasn't just some experiment was going to fail, that our country was actually getting stronger, and that we beat the British again, and that we're not a pawn for European powers to play with. So that's what this shows. It also showed that because there were some transportation problems over land from the eastern section of the United States to the western section during this war, it showed that we really needed to develop our transportation and national infrastructure, improve on United States infrastructure. That's a great thing it showed there, a need for internal improvements. We're going to see those come next. Industries, it showed that, you know, we were too dependent on Great Britain, that we really needed to become self-sufficient and independent as a country when it comes to manufacturing things, making things. So it's going to launch the United States toward economic independence. An interruption of trade with a blockade by the British encouraged the growth of manufacturing and inventions. We're going to see that in the Industrial Revolution. Alright, I hope this helps you out. I hope that you got the 4 I's down, and I like that. I like the 4 I's myself, and those help me remember, because I can remember interruption, impressment, inciting, insistence, inciting, impressment, interruption. Just say that over and over again. Get it in your head. Interruption of trade, impressment of American citizens, inciting the Native Americans, and insistence on the British to stand in the Ohio River Valley. The 4 I's. Alright, good luck on the test.